Hey folks, Immortal Mage here, back to give a quick demonstration on navigating the Ouroboros sequencer. So when building this, one of the first principles that I had in mind was let's make it fun, creative, and powerful within the form factor of a phone. Creating so many features within such a tiny form factor was difficult, and especially doing it in a way that still felt light and really like childish almost in how you played with it. So in order to make the most of what's available, there's a lot of tools and tricks that are put into place to hopefully make navigating, the length of sequences and the depth of the layers easier for you. The first thing that I want to note is when using Ouroboros, I highly encourage you to use it as a single instance and route multiple channels into it. The way you do this is add your audio channels. So in this case, I'll use one drum, one piano, and one synth. And of course, you can add more tracks as you develop your song and your idea. And then you route it to Ouroboros and you filter it to the channel that you want to apply to the track. So now my drums will apply to, so I can check the channels. There's 16 available on Ouroboros by pressing track 1 up here or track 1 down here. And you can see that I have 16 here. Selecting the trigs changes the channel. So now the drums are going to be routed to track 1. The piano will be routed to track 2. And track 3. And you can hear them being played here. So there's a ton of reasons why you want to use just a single instance of Ouroboros, a part of its patterns and scenes. And if you haven't checked it out, look at the demo on the tone mode. That mode is reason enough to really just only want to use a single instance. Like the more you separate them, the more functionality and the more creative possibilities you lose out on. Okay, so now we open up the app, and the first thing that you'll see is it presents you with the home screen of track 1. We can set the track to either be a tone track or a drum track. A tone track just means you're going to be working with a range or a scale of notes. A drum track expects you to be working with tone track. You see the notes you're playing. Go to one we haven't been to yet. Drum track. See the 16 pads of the drums that you're going to play. You can also change it by going down here to the transformation menu. So that gets us to the general layout of the sequence once we've entered it. The sequence, every track is exactly the same thing. All that changes is how you set it up. On the left, you have the layers of your track. The first 3, sequence, tone, and ARP, are going to be per track. You can think of your track as the accumulation of all 3 of those that then send MIDI data out to be processed by the global patterns, which is Prism, and then sent out to the rest of you, or sent out to your audio units. So Prism is going to be, as a whole, it's across the entire song instance, whereas each of these are the 16 tracks. And you'll see that they reflect the colors of the track that you're working on. Okay, so this isn't supposed to be a full demo, so I'm really just going to now jump into what are the tricks and how can you use this. The first is while using your sequence, you select your active notes from over here. You change your modes, the layers that you're focused on over here. Generally, you can think of your keypad as augmenting and giving you extra ability to influence the state that you're in. Sorry, we'll let that pass. So within each state, you have a loop and the main action mode. And then for the overall track, you have a loop bar. So this lets you focus in on just a certain number of bars of your pattern. And then you also have your scenes in your pattern. The patterns are going to be per track and the scenes are going to be per song, but you can view them from wherever you are. So for example, if I'm in the sequence, this is the keypad that I see in the actions that are available. But if I go to ARP, I'm going to have a different set of actions. And if I go to tone, I'm going to have an even different set of actions. And if I'm in Prism, I'm going to have a different set of keypad actions. So your right will transform to reflect what's needed on your left. If you dig a lot into a setting, so let's say I'm like at an ARP and I'm looking at my patterns and scenes, and I don't want to have to think of them in two different ways, you can double press any state to go to its home state across, both the left and the right sides. So there's a lot of left and right thinking because this was originally designed for an iPhone. So all you've got are two thumbs. So continuing on to the idea of two thumbs, you've got your sequence, you're pressing you're selecting your active notes, you're pressing them down, you're changing them. You can always select a note to enter the trig focus mode. This allows you to change settings on just that trig, including adding and removing notes, adjusting the parameters. You can also drag the graphic to do this, changing the velocity, and you can use these trigs to quickly change the length. Press an empty trig to adjust to that point. Press the end of them to snap back to just one trig size. So I use this all the time. I love this feature. You can also select other trigs and then they'll be applied, or any changes will also be applied to them. So now you can see they have two notes. Within the trig focus mode, you also have this lock button. So you can press that so that you can let go, and then you can just edit all the trigs. To exit trig focus mode once you've pressed lock, you can either press a trig, and what this does is it exits trig focus mode without disabling the trig focus lock. So if I go back, my trig focus lock is still applied. If I exit by pressing the trig focus lock, I go back in, trig focus lock is disabled. I'm still in trig focus mode, I can just let go. There's also this sample. Pressing that lets you play out the keys. So I can press that. I have this track disabled. But that was a drum track, so it wasn't going to do anything. But if I lay this down, you can see it immediately played. So that's a really handy way to test out the chords that you're playing down as you're playing them. All right, so that's your trig focus mode. You can spend a lot of time in there. It lets you really dig in deep and add some versatility and characterization of what you're playing. If you want to change the length of your sequence, you've got all kinds of options here. This proved to be one of the more difficult design processes in the whole ideation of this device, but it all happens through this note graphic key down here. So what this is the number of pages. It's set to 4. It always shows 4 to give you more room to tap, but at this beginning, only 1 page is active. If I press this, you enter the main sequence setup mode. Here you can clone, which duplicates the sequence, or stretch it, which stretches all the notes alongside. You can quickly select between the pages by tapping any of the trigs. Only 1 page is available now. You can set the bars and the 30-second length. You can change the trig resolution, which doesn't change the speed, but changes the distance between each step. So it could be a 16th step or an 8th note. Sorry, a 16th note or an 8th note or a quarter note between each step, depending on what you set. And what that will do is change the number of pages, but it won't change the number of bars or the overall length of the sequence. It's just a way to zoom in and out. And you might see notes disappear, especially as you zoom out. They'll still play, they just won't be visible until you zoom back in. On your right, you also have quick access to change a lot of these features. You can press the top 8 pads to change the resolution. And notice that as I change the resolution to some of the higher bits, especially 30 seconds, it's 1 bar, but now it takes 32 steps to fill that 1 bar. So now I have 2 pages available, and I can jump between them by pressing here. This white button will automatically select a resolution that puts the entire sequence on 1 page. These bottom 8 pads allow you to quickly change the sequence length. So now it's 4 bars, and when I select it while in 1 page, it'll automatically change the resolution to keep you in 1 page. So if I want to break that, I can go to 1/16, and now I have 4 bars. At 1/16 step, takes 4 pages. At 8 bars, it takes 8 pages. I can press again and enter 16. Once you get past 8, it's too many circles to draw, so then you get just a description of the page that you're at and the graphic that's playing. So this is the main sequence setup mode. It's where you can go for tracks, or you can even go for drum tracks. And you'll see that, let's set this up as a drum track. You'll see when I go as a drum track, it looks almost exactly the same except for this button down here. This is your linked button. At the setup, when you start a drum track, all of the pads are linked to the same length. But if I want to break that, I can, and now I can set up each pad to have its own length. I can set up polyrhythms. You can do whatever you want with it from there. So, huge note, tiny button, huge implications for the organization and the creative possibilities of your sound. Okay, so that's how you can set this up, but I had a lot of fun with getting this up to 16 bars, but it turns out when you look at it, playing with 16 bars as a user is really difficult on a sequencer like that. Like, I get why the Digitact and Arturia and so many sequencers set them up to just be 4 bars. Like, it just becomes really cumbersome. So there's a few tools and tricks in place to help you navigate that. The first is to get to the shortcut menu of the sequence setup. I mean, you can swipe right and left, but who wants to do that 16 times? You know, you could tap and select your page, but you can also press and hold, and the right keypads will become a navigator. At the bottom, you can tap to select the page, and you can change the number of bars. On the right, at the top right, you have access to this is really what I call the navigator. And I want to show this off by going to a drum track, and you'll see that this symbolically represents this. They're the same thing. On your left, you have 4 pads. They're nearly identical. On your left, you have 4 pads that change the resolution. On here, you have 32 steps because you're playing with drums and you might break it down more. On this, you're going to use it more for the keypads and the tonal stuff, and tonal stuff doesn't play a whole lot with 30 seconds, so instead you have access to the 1-page resolution button. But anyways, you can quickly change the resolution. You can, and let's make this more bars. So I can change the resolution. As I do, it changes the number of pages. To the right is your page quadrant navigator. This lets you quickly jump between the quadrants of your song. So when there's 4 pages, there's 4 quadrants. Each of these effectively represents 1 page. But as I go up, the quadrants now represent more than just a page. For example, the first quadrant is the first page. But by the time you get to the 3rd quadrant, which represents the halfway point, you're at page 4. So this allows you to quickly jump and think of longer sections of your longer patterns of your sequence in sections. When they do break up to be more than 1 page, and all the actions that I'm performing here, I can do over here too. So I can change the page here. I can press again to jump to the next page within that quadrant. I can press again and it'll loop back to the beginning. So in that way, I can very quickly go from the first page, and then maybe I can work on the break right before it gets to the second half, and then I can work on the break right before it gets to the very end. You can even press and hold to immediately jump to the end of that, which could be useful if, say, I jump up to 16 bars. Now there's 4 pages per quadrant, so I can press and hold, and now I'll be at the very end. So this navigator is a really powerful tool for navigating larger sequences, for zooming in and out, for applying complexity, for really playing with the nuance of what's coming out of the device and hopefully taking advantage of a lot of the power there. And it came a little late in the game. I'm really excited when I thought of it. And since then, I've made sure to implement it so that it's always accessible through this press and hold menu from wherever you're at. So becoming familiar with it and using it to whatever workflow you end up picking and adopting through this device will be really handy. Moving forward, there's not a whole lot to explain about the tone menu in terms of hacks or tricks. Let me jump back to a track select menu. Oh, you can press and hold the sequence setup mode or sequencer to enter the sequence setup mode. The same is true for Prism. Anywhere there's a sequencer, you can press and hold to enter the sequence setup mode. Within the ARP, The real note within the ARP is that if you press and hold, you'll enter the advanced ARP setup mode. So in the same way that I had difficulty working with 16 pages, I also had difficulties working with 16 ARP steps. So to fix that, I created this mode. Each of the trigs represents one of the steps. If you go up to 16 steps, you can still quickly select them through the trigs. And on your right side, each of the keypads represents a shift value. So select a trig, apply a shift value. You can even apply a shift value, continue to hold it, and press all the trigs that you want to apply it to. You can do that to skip. You can jump back. So this is a way that you can really quickly play with all 16 ARP steps. You can change the octaves through the buttons over here. So you can see now I'm 2 octaves up in terms of how much will it jump. Yeah, and you can also access that by going to the transformations in the advanced edit mode. You have access to cloning, which would just double this. You can see that. And the stretch ARP. What the stretch ARP does, it takes all the filled notes and it puts an empty note in between them. So it's only available if you're within, 1 to 8 steps. But you can then do that, raise the rate, to 1/8, and you'll play the same sequence back. But you'll have access to these little empty notes where you can start to add nuance. You can use those to play rhythmic undertones. You can combine that with the ARP legato, which tells it, ignore the choke and instead just play each ARP step until another ARP step is filled. So those are fun advantages you can take with that. You have down here in the transformation menu, you can shift the ARP pattern right and left, and you can raise a step up and down an octave quickly through these buttons. The Prism mode works exactly the same as a sequencer. In terms of what we're talking about today, this is a little bit different because you're not playing notes, you're playing shifts, but you've got access to a looper, a pattern, you can press and hold here and you have access to the quick navigator. With the quick navigator, if you hold your finger down and exit, you can hold the view up, press it again to quickly leave the view. Yeah. So that's, without even playing, that's just like hopping around the device in an easy way to do it. The final few things I want to show are about what you can do while the device is playing. One of those things is, I'm going to go to a fresh track. I'm going to mute this guy so it doesn't distract us. I'm going to stretch this. All right, so now we have this slow playing track. Say you're working on your chords and you're like, okay, I've got this going on. I know I like, this part up here, but I'm not sure about this part down here. And you're really just trying to focus in on this. Press and hold and press play to resume playback from that portion of the sequencer. And it'll resume playback from that step for every single track. So the entire song will go back to the point that you would expect it to. You can also use your loop mode to quickly loop a single page. So the way to do this, let's say again, I'm focusing on these lower tracks and I'm saying, let's step this down. So now I have 2 pages. I like my first page and my second page is what I want to work on. Press and hold and it'll say looping current page. And you'll see now that it'll just play this page. It'll get to the point that you want and now you're looping here. Once you've got that set up and ready to go, you can reset the loop points by holding that down. So this can become really powerful when you're jumping around and you're saying, okay, I'm focused on this point now, let's make this 8. You're like, I'm focused on this point within this quadrant and I want to get this break in. So I'll loop that while I'm working on it. And then when you're done, you exit that loop and now you want to work on the very end. So you go and you loop just that portion. Okay, well that didn't fully behave the way, okay, yeah. So now you just want to loop that portion. Maybe you want to go here and you want to loop this portion. Something appears to be wrong with wanting to loop the very end. I'll fix that. But you can see what I'm getting at. Like you can quickly jump around to whatever portion of the pattern you want to work on. Then you can loop that page, you can edit it. You can jump out of the loop points, go to where you want to work next, jump back into that, reset the loop points, bounce back to the to the play point that you want. So that's how you can start to use the navigator, looping, and the play as a trio to editing live playing sequences. Okay, so this is already proven to be way longer, but I think this covers a lot, especially as you watch some of the free plays, and you'll see me do some of this stuff, and I'll try to explain it there, but in case I miss it, and if you're wondering, you can always go back to this video, and this should cover everything that I'm really using as a trick to navigate and, you know, develop my own workflow around this device. Because as you've seen, there's multiple ways to do just about anything. So hopefully you can find what feels most natural to you. And if you have any other ideas, or if you find that using a portion of this still feels really clunky, let me know. I absolutely don't think I've figured this out completely. I know there's still a way to go, and I want this to be, you know, as intuitive as possible. So I'd love to hear your feedback, and I hope you have some creative fun with this. I hope you get out into the sun, pull out your phone, pull out your iPad, and make something awesome. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.